Hey, it's me, Jack J. I'm the founder of iTero Gaming, and I'm also the data scientist that built the AI models that are behind the app. Now today I just want to take you guys through the app and really show you a real life use case using my own account, and maybe show you some of the hidden features that aren't so obvious the first time you're using it. Now straight away you'll notice, if you've already got the app or if you are going to download it, that it looks slightly different on my screen. That's because I have iTero Plus, one of the benefits of being the founder, and that just removes the adverts for me and gives me a slightly different layout, as well as some other benefits that you can find. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, there's obviously this knowledge center, which gives you some text information about all of the various things, but I'm going to assume you've read all of these, and we'll just jump straight into the match history. What this is an accumulation of just all of our games. This isn't anything you wouldn't have seen already on OPGG or any of the other sort of game tracker sites. However, the big difference is the amount of data that we've got on each of these individual games. But first of all, let's just look at this drafting score. So this will make more sense once you actually see the drafting model live. But essentially it evaluates how good was that pick, the Pantheon in this case, for the team comp that I ended up playing against. So you can see that the Pantheon into this team ended up being incredibly strong, and hopefully by my KDA you'll agree that it ended up being a really, really powerful pick. We can then also go into the game and see some more details about almost any of our stats. We have over 500 statistics. There's loads to choose from. And they're all broken down by the game, what part of the game you're in. So we have the 0 to 7, 7 to 14, all the way up to sort of the late game of the 28-minute plus, which actually this game ended up going quite late. I think it was a 40-minute game in total. So we can just pick any of these stats, right? So how many solo kills did I get? And we click into this, and you can see that this game I had one solo kill in the first 7 minutes of the game. On average, I get 0.3 solo kills, so in about 30% of the games I'll get one. And the average in my elo is to get 0.4. So it actually puts me in the lowest 36th percentile of all players. We can compare that as well to the elo. So this is me, my averages, and this is the elo averages. If you've never seen this graph before, very, very simple box whisper plot. The top is your 95 percentile. Your second one down, this line here, is your 75%. Then you have your mean, which is your kind of the thick white line here, and then bottom 25% and bottom 5%. So essentially it's just kind of the extreme values. So like in my very good games, I'll get just above 1, and in my very bad games, I'll get less than 0. Now the reason you can have less than 0 kills is because all of the statistics we calculate are adjusted by the champion pool you play. So basically this is saying that I'm playing champions who are expected to get at least 0.2 kills, but I'm not getting any at all, so it's adjusting them below 0. So that seems a bit odd, but actually makes sense when you're comparing it to the sort of champion pools that I play. So for instance, Pantheon is a bit more of an aggressive laner, therefore you would expect to get at least a couple of solo kills with him. Compare that to someone like an Azir or a Ryze or something like that, where the solo kill in the early game is going to be lower. So you get this, and there are literally over 500 statistics, so we won't go through all of them. They're broken down all between the different games, and each of those have the same information. So you go assist, you get the exact same informational graph. You can also filter these by the type, so you can see sort of the resource ones, which are things like your CS and your gold per minute, the combat, which is KDAs and damages, and you can get your kills on every laner, your deaths to every laner, your deaths in every lane, your kills in every lane, as well as first bloods, how many times you die under attack. There's loads. There's so much information. Honestly, I think it's just best to kind of go through this in your own time. And we've got this for every single game, and therefore we have it also on an account average perspective. So we can see all of my stats that you saw previously, except summed for my account in general. And these are also ranked at the moment. The default is to go from high to low. So remember that percentile means of all the players in the player base, being in the highest second means that only 2% of the player base have a higher stat than me in this particular statistic. And then if we go all the way down to the bottom, there's only 10% of the player base who have a lower stat than me on this particular stat. And we have, again, all those stats you saw previously we've got. So let's take one at random. So I'll just pick assists here. And you can see that this actually has movement, and that's because we're tracking it for your recent games. So over the last 30 games or so, you can see my assists kind of staying relatively flat around my average at 7.9, and then more recently it's kind of ticked up a little bit. And then if we scroll down, we can actually see all of the games that I played recently and what the score was. So you can see that in the last sort of 4 games or so, I had a really high assist number. So it makes sense that my average is sort of tracking up at this point. Now, these stats are incredible, and I really do encourage you to just download the app just for once, right, and just take a look at these stats, because it is so insightful to tell you about your account. And it even breaks down, we can come onto this later, but we can even look at your friends, so you can add people to your leaderboard. I'm not friends with Caps or Faker, but I have added them nonetheless, so I could then compare myself to them. So for instance, let's take a stat that I assume that they're both going to be quite high on, which is damage dealt in the early game. So we take 0 to 7 minutes and we look at total damage dealt. And then what I'm going to do is just, here I am, I'm doing just less than 2,000, which is very slightly less than my ELO average, which puts me just below the 50th percentile. And we can compare myself to Caps, who's massively ahead, 2,500, first in all of his ELO. So me and Caps, believe it or not, aren't in the same ELO. So I'm being compared to a different bucket than him. I'm being compared to sort of Emerald-ish players, and he's being compared to sort of the Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger players. And even against Sem, he is the first of all Challenger and ELO players in damage dealt. And then you have Faker, slightly less, but still pretty high. Which actually brings on to a really interesting statistic. I'm just bringing this up because I think it's interesting, which is the damage done to received ratio. So this is basically how much damage I do divided by how much damage I've received. And if you are dealing the same amount of damage as you are taking, it will be 1. And any lower means you're receiving more damage, and any higher means you're giving more damage. So you can see the ELO, I am quite low actually. I'm the bottom third of players in damage received ratio, so I'm basically taking more damage than I'm giving out. You can see it's sort of, these are okay, but in my losses, definitely I'm taking 50% of all damage I gave, of all damage I took, I actually gave back. So that's a terrible stat for me. And you can look at Caps, who's 1, so he's doing equal, and that actually puts him in the highest 25. So again, with these statistics, I just recommend going through them all in your own time. There are so many to go through, and you learn so much about yourself and your playstyle for it that it's worth the time. Now, we're going to skip this one and come back to it, and we're just going to go straight to the AI coach now. Now, what we can do here is take all of those statistics and we push them through our AI model. Now, what that's been able to do is study millions and millions of games and look at statistics on every single account and every single game within those accounts and say who's actually winning games, who's losing, and why are they winning, why are they losing. So to give you an example, the model has seen so many games that it's learnt that the team that gets the first Herald and the first Dragon tends to win more games than the teams that don't. So that's then a learnt behaviour of the model to say, yes, it's good to get 1+ on the Dragons and 1+ on the Heralds. And then it takes your games, your recent games, your most recent 50 actually, to be specific, if it can get up to 50, and it will analyse your games versus the model, and it says, how are you actually changing your win rates? You know, what's making you win more games? What's making you lose more games? So to give you a really real example, let's say that you're someone who dies way too much to the jungler, right? You might have a 50% win rate, but you just die to the jungler all the time, especially in the first 7 minutes of the game. The model is going to see that metric, and it's going to see that you die to the jungler twice every single game in the first 7 minutes of the game. And it's going to go, this is seriously impacting your chance of winning the game. And therefore it is your biggest weakness, is dying to the jungler. And it's going to do that across every single one of your statistics, and then choose and rank them in order and say, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? So we can just jump straight into mine. And there is a little bit of a text summary that's worth reading. The first part is more about your champion pool, which again we'll come back to in a second, but it's basically saying I play too many champions. I've played 16 champions in 50 games, which is a bit ridiculous. You should be aiming, I mean, we don't have the mathematical proof for this yet. We're still looking into methods in which we can do this, but the sort of the general consensus amongst coaches in the industry is it's anywhere between 1 tricking and around about 6 champions, with sort of 3 as your core and then 3 as your sort of optional picks if the circumstance is good for them. Again, with this average AI draft rating, we'll come back to it. It's part of another drafting model that actually comes in-game with you. But it's basically saying, on a scale of 0 to 5, how well do you draft? And mine's 3.8 because I use the model almost religiously, so it's going to be on the higher scale than a lot of people. But I also do like to first-time champions and ranked occasionally, so that does bring it down. We then get the profile summary. So this is about your macro performance. And you can see, for me, I'm playing well or exceptionally in the mid to late game. And I've been doing well in skewing dragons and barons, so a bit of an objective player. I'm maintaining a high KDA in the mid game, so I'm quite a safe objective player. Now, they'll give you the best chance to climb. I'm going to have to be more strategic with my deaths in the early game. Look for dragons in the sort of early mid game, 7 to 14, and just being more on the map in the 14 to 21 minute mark. So let's actually see what it means by all of that. That's a good sort of written summary, but I much prefer just looking at raw stats personally. So as you can see, my late game is where I'm the strongest, and my early game is where I'm the weakest. And this is something I'm aware of from my own gameplay. I tend to int the first 14 minutes and then spend the rest of the game trying to out-macro people. Probably a case of getting too old to play League of Legends, and my hands aren't what they used to be, so I tend to lose most of my early trading, as we saw in that stats earlier. So we can see just the top 3 improvement areas. I don't call them weaknesses. I prefer improvement areas psychologically. I think it sounds better. And we can see, so in the 0 to 7 mark, I'm my deaths total value. So I'm not generating my deaths aren't good deaths. Essentially, I'm losing value for the team every time I die. Taking a huge amount of damage, the highest 13%, something we spoke about earlier. And I'm not taking any dragons in the first 7 minutes. Now, this actually appears sometimes for top laners, and I always get people saying, but I'm a top laner, how do I'm never getting dragon assists, so how do I affect this stat? All of the stats with objectives include objective secures when you're not even involved. So if your team gets the dragon, you still get credited for the dragon. It's just giving your team the dragon kill, same with the baron. So it's not based on assists. And there are things that everyone can do in order to improve your objective secure. So for instance, a support could go out and heavily ward an area around an objective and then not even be there, but they're still being useful. So if you are low on one of these stats, so for instance, my very early game dragons is incredibly low, lowest 10th percent in the elo, it is because of something I'm doing wrong, right? So with this one, there's a number of different ways to interpret these statistics, and there always will be. And this is why we say that the tool isn't a replacement for a coach. It's just free, so it's a good introduction to the coaching environment, because you can understand your account, interpret these statistics as you will, but if you do want to take it to the next level, it's still always good to go actually hire a real one-to-one coach to spend time with. Now we're going to jump into, I'm going to pick the 0 to 7, and we're going to look at my strengths and weaknesses. So again, dying too much, damage taken, and net dragons. So let's take a look at this damage taken thing, and again we can see, comparing it to elo, I'm just, especially in these extreme cases, so I seem to, the average isn't that much worse, but there's games where I'm just massively ahead, massively higher than anyone else in the elo at taking damage. So I'm just basically playing okay, but then let's say 25% of my games I'm just getting killed constantly. And we can kind of see some equivalents where my sort of damages spike. So these are normal games, even though I lost, I'm not taking too much damage. But then, yeah, see this loss, massive amount of damage taken, massive amount of damage taken. Some of the wins, massive damage taken. But I remember this game, I did hard in the early game. I was like 0 and 4 or something. I just had a better jungler than them. So, yeah, these are indicators where I agree that I am just taking too much damage. And so what I'm going to be looking at is, well, how can I improve on this? So this will be a bit of research, right? This isn't just going to be answering the questions for me. I have to think and maybe speak to the community, do some research, ask some friends. I'm taking too much damage in the first 7 minutes. Like, what can I do about it? And usually the responses are things like, well, just play more passive. You know, don't look for trades. If you're bad at trading, don't look for them. Just sit and farm as best you can. And warding and sort of defending against jungle pressure and stuff like that also will help, because this includes damage taken from all sources of champions. So if the jungler ganks me, I'm going to take an entire health bar worth of health. So that's going to spike the damage. Cool. So that is a brief overview of the AI coach. Again, like the stats page, much better just go through it in your own time and understand it. So now we're going to just look at the champions, the champion pool feature. So what I can do here is just look at my overall. So here's my win rate for my top 3 champions. My top 3 champions being these 3. Fairly good win rate, especially on this Diana, having quite a few good games with her. Gives just some basic information. We then go on to how many I play. Like we said last time, 16 in the last 50 games is kind of in the unacceptable region when it comes to just speed improving. You know, if I want to climb the rank ladder, I should be aiming more sort of at least in this middle mark, if not in this sort of green zone. We then look at this drafting score. So again, drafting score is based on how well the AI thinks your champion was, how well it's going to perform against the composition you're playing against. And you can see when it's ranked 4 to 5, I'm sort of winning 50%, which is, you know, not great. 3 to 4 is 65%. 2 to 3 is 50%. And then when I'm sort of inting the draft, I'm losing 25%. And then I won one game where I had 0 to 1. So we don't really look at that one that much. We can also disable the mastery. So mastery is a massive impact on these draft scores. So we can either say to look at this table if it's considering how good I am at the champion or if it isn't, and they produce slightly different results. And then we have just the final table. So this is 5 to 20 champions that I've played between 5 and 20 games of, and you can see I've got a 56% win rate. And then we scroll down further, champions that I've had 4 or less games on have a 45% win rate. So you can see this table on the right kind of demonstrates why you should be one-tricking, or at least keeping to a big pool, because the champions that I play a lot of, I have a high win rate on. Champions that I'm sort of one-timing, sort of these, I tend to have a much lower win rate on. So just kind of evidence. Now what we can do is actually take some information from this and design a champion pool. So for instance, Swain, Diana and Lux I consider a pretty good core for myself. They cover a lot of bases. I would probably then add on Malphite, because he's kind of my special counterpick, even though my win rate is actually dreadful on him, at least in the 8 games I've played. Not feeling the Echo and the Anivia at the moment, but I'm really enjoying the Pantheon. So what I'll do is go to this champions page, and for the mid lane I'll just add these champions into my pool. And what this does is it means that when you're next queuing up, when you go into the drafting tool, which we'll go through in a second, it's going to show these champions before anything else. So kind of a little reminder when you actually get into game to say these are the champions that you want to play at the moment, so maybe you should pick one of these. And we could do the same for my top lane, which is kind of my second position, but I don't have a lot of data, so I think, you know, the Scion and the Maokai and the Aatrox are kind of my core, but I won't need reminding of that when I get into game. Cool, so that's a summary of the new features that have come with V2 of iTero. What I'm going to do now is just skip ahead to myself in a drafting, and you'll be able to see the features of the drafting model. Now that we're in draft, the AI drafting model has come with us, and what it's going to do is make a recommendation on the best champions to fit this composition based on all the information it has. And because we're last pick, we're going to get all of the information from both our team and the enemy team. Straight away you can see just some early recommendations. Because I have the iTero Plus, it's going to be updating regularly. If you've got the normal version, it'll only give you the recommendations right at the start as a sort of a blind pick, and then it will tell you when it's your turn to pick which ones are the best for that situation. But in the meantime, we can just look at things like the strengths of the various picks. So at the moment it's Lux, synergizes well with the ADC and the jungler. Now that everyone's locked in, it still is either Lux or Pantheon. So we make a decision there, look at the weaknesses. So it's not a great lane. Pantheon, if we look, is not great in the laning phase because it's getting less gold. So we just make a decision. We'll go with the Pantheon here and lock that in. And we'll also get the rune recommendations. Now you get these at the end because it uses the full draft to then analyse what the best runes are. So we'll push those, but there's also a setting to auto push, which I've got on. We also have one other useful setting, which is the meta, non-meta. So this basically filters how meta the picks are. And you'll also see this champion mastery option, which if I disable will treat me as if I'm equally good on all champions. Right, we're going to now jump in and hopefully win this game. Just a final screen that is also useful to look at is you get your in-game screen, which tells you the improvement areas the AI coach has picked up on. So remember, for me, it was taking too much damage in the early game, so that will tell me that. And then in the next 7 to 14 minutes, it'll tell me my improvement areas for that time frame. I also get a few tips, so going to get ahead in this lane. Our team outscales, which is good to know, so we don't have to force anything. And I hard counter their ADC, so I should be playing around them as best as possible. You then get all of the draft information on the right, and you also get the pairing, so how well I pair with each of my laners, good with Nyla, good with Rakan, and how well I counter the enemy team. So counter the Hecarim, counter the Kai'Sa and the Zillion, and then do just slightly above average on the Zoe and the Aatrox. So we can now use all of this information and go in and give ourselves the best chance of winning this game.